Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Pro Bono Best Practices Part 2, Crafting Bite-Sized Pro Bono Opportunities for Immigration Services. This webinar is sponsored by the ABA Commission on Immigration and the ABA Center for Pro Bono. Just a couple of housekeeping items to start out. Please remember that we are in webinar format, so if you do have questions, please feel free to submit those through the Q&A function. And try to keep them out of the chat. We will answer any questions you have throughout the program. So please just submit those via the Q&A. I will go ahead and I'd like to just introduce our panelists. We have a great group of panelists today with some amazing expertise. Our first panelist is Caroline Vanderharten. She is the Director of Immigration Legal Services at SOAR Immigration Legal Services in Oregon. Kate Senna is the Maryland Immigrant Legal Assistance Project Director at the Pro Bono Resource Center of Maryland. And Sarah Hanners is the Staff Attorney at Catholic Charities Legal Services of Miami. So welcome everyone. To start out, I'd like to start to have just each of you briefly talk about really quickly what your program does. Give us a description of your program and the types of services that you provide and any of your sort of bite-sized smaller pro bono projects that you sponsor. I'm going to go ahead and start with Caroline, if that's okay.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here and talk with you all about the projects we have in Oregon. So I am, as Marissa said, I'm the Director of SOAR Immigration Legal Services, which is a program of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. We have offices both in Portland and in Hillsborough, and we provide culturally competent immigration-related legal representation and education to low-income immigrants in Oregon and have been doing so since 1992. The types of services that we focus on are humanitarian-based and family-based immigration, also naturalization and removal defense. So we have various programs and things that we're known for in the community, including our Cuban Haitian program, our naturalization citizenship program, our removal defense collaborative, and also our new Afghan initiative to serve the incoming Afghan evacuees. So the types of projects that we do that we are really able to provide kind of these bite-sized pro bono opportunities involve group processing workshops. So we do group processing every year for citizenship. That's one of our kind of regular staples. We collaborate with a number of partners and we'll be talking more about that. But we've also used group processing for other things as well. So we have typically an annual Refugee Adjustment Day where we support new refugees with applying for their green card after they've been here for 1 year. We've also done DACA renewal clinics in collaboration with the Mexican consulate and others. And once the Afghan crisis came up earlier in the fall, we also identified a need for humanitarian parole. So we were able to also do some group processing with humanitarian parole. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And maybe I can pass it to Kate.
Hi, yeah, my name is Kate Senna, and so I do direct the Maryland Immigrant Legal Assistance Project, which is a program of the Pro Bono Resource Center of Maryland, which itself is actually the pro bono arm of the Maryland State Bar Association. We, for the last 30 years, recruit and have trained and engaged Maryland lawyers to participate in pro bono programs in the civil legal services statewide. Many of the volunteers we recruit and train end up volunteering with us directly in areas of great need, but then we also serve as a clearinghouse for volunteer opportunities in the civil legal services by recruiting and training volunteers in a variety of substantive legal areas before we then connect them with nonprofits statewide who can use their help. So we do a lot of limited scope work in my organization. We have identified areas in foreclosure prevention, estate planning, tax sale prevention, eviction defense, consumer debt defense, and immigration defense, where we use or train and engage volunteers in really clinic-based, short-term, limited scope opportunities. And I direct our immigration-related work primarily during non-COVID times. You will find me, my team, and a group of volunteers serving as an immigration court help desk of sorts at the Baltimore Immigration Court, offering what we call immigration legal triage services which primarily takes the form of an immigration consult, although it does include some pro se service as well. Over the years, since my program began in, my particular program began in 2015, we have helped to coordinate workshops either as a part of our triage work or also in partnership with other organizations, immigration consult clinics, using volunteers to help intake clients to another nonprofit's organization, family safety planning or family contingency planning clinics, an experimental special immigrant juvenile status predicate order clinic, which did not involve clients and just involved the volunteers, some asylum pro se work, and I'm so excited to be speaking with you all today. Thanks for including me on the panel, guys.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh. Hi, everyone. Greetings from Miami. My name is Sarah Hanners. I'm a staff attorney at Catholic Legal Services and Pro Bono coordinator. So our organization does a combination of all the things that have just been mentioned. We're a high volume legal service provider, and we serve the immigrant community in South Florida. We also focus on humanitarian immigration services. Most of our clients are indigent. I'm lucky enough that I work on the kids team. So I work with a great group of kids. We do direct representation. All of our clients are in deportation proceedings at the immigration court. So we do full service direct representation on our team. We represent children who cross the border unaccompanied and who are looking for refugee services, help with asylum, help with special immigrant juvenile visas. And we also work with trafficking victims. Our firm has more comprehensive services, though, not just kid focused. We work with a lot of adults. We also have citizenship clinics, naturalization clinics, TPS, and our bite-sized opportunities are constantly evolving. We're trying to really develop this area. And so I'm really excited to see so many participants on today. And we're trying to shift our focus away from just direct rep, because that is very intensive. And we understand that pro bono attorneys may not want to, commit to the whole gamut. So we offer opportunities to help us complete pro se asylums. We have a waiting list. I think it's about 300 people deep at this point, waiting for help with pro se asylums. I mentioned that we have our TPS and naturalization clinics. We've moved those remote. And so that's actually great. We've been able to serve a lot more people that way. We also use interns and pro bono attorneys for interpretation services, translation, country conditions research. And we're also trying to do the special immigrant juvenile bifurcation thing where we ask family law attorneys to help us get that predicate order. So that's our next plan that we're trying to get off the ground. And the last bite-sized opportunity that we have that's fairly new, but it's been really successful and we're super excited about it, is we have pro bono attorneys helping us write appeals to the Board of Immigration Appeals to write the briefs, because that's outside of the scope of our representation for the kids, but we often end up helping them. And so it's a great way for attorneys who don't want to do direct rep or don't want to go in front of the court or enter their appearance, but who are strong writers, to make a huge impact in a kid's life or an adult's. So that's what we have at the moment.
Thanks so much, everyone, for those great descriptions of everything that you do. So to start off with, if you were talking to someone who is just getting started and wanting to start one of these projects, what advice would you give to them, and what would you say are sort of the best practices for where you start in crafting some of these brief service opportunities? I'll go ahead and let's start with Sarah maybe on this one, since it sounds like you're actually in the process of doing this for some projects right now.
Yeah, so the first thing that we do is we have a conversation with the volunteer, because a lot of the pro bono platforms that we use really limit us to a word count in terms of describing the project. And I think it's very important to have a very frank conversation with them about time commitment, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they hope to get out of it, and then what we expect on our end. Because the last thing that anybody wants in the process is for the case to be given back. It's not fair on the client, it's not fair on the legal service provider. And then the pro bono attorney is obviously not having a good time and they're not going to come back and help us again. So that's not what we want. So an honest conversation, I think, is the best way to start any of these type of relationships.
Caroline or Kate, do you have anything to add about sort of what you would say are some of the best practices and things you would do when crafting and developing some of these brief service opportunities?
Sure. I can add for kind of group processing events. Once you have identified, there's a large group of clients or individuals who need a very specific service, you can kind of start to think about, is this something that might, where people might benefit from group processing? So generally for those types of events, you're going to want to look for very straightforward, similar cases, typically with few or no red flags. So kind of keep that in mind. But if you do identify that you would want to do a group processing event, the first thing we always do is start with your timeline. So with a timeline, you can kind of go through the steps and make sure that you're kind of getting everything that you need. So what we do is, 2 or 3 months out before the event, we connect with partners and we do a lot of outreach to make sure that we're not hosting an event that won't be attended or won't be well attended. You're going to be putting some time and energy behind it, so you want to make sure it's an effective event. And don't underestimate the power of partnership. We have so many partners who are not legal services offices who do significant outreach with the community and really drive people to our events. Then we pre-screen. So again, if you're doing group processing, you do want to make sure that whoever's attending is going to, have kind of limited red flags. At least in our situation, that's what we're looking for. You want to decide, are you going to take complicated cases? And if so, will they participate in the event, or is there a separate pool of more experienced pro bono attorneys who will be supporting those cases? If you're not taking complicated cases, be prepared with referrals so that you'll have a place to refer those individuals. Some of the people who are coming to these pre-screening events might be individuals who haven't met with you or your organization yet, or maybe even with an attorney. So you want to try to make sure that they're having a good experience and they have, kind of a warm referral if they're not able to participate in the event. When you're doing the pre-screening, you'll want to make sure that you have all the information about what time they'll have their appointment during the group processing. If it's at a different location, if it's in person, you'll want to have all the information and directions on how to get there. We've hosted events at libraries and consulates and other places, so make sure you have that information available. If you're doing it by Zoom, make sure that there are instructions on that. Typically, we hold at least one pre-screening event, but typically about 3, just to make sure we have a good number of individuals available to participate in the event. And generally, we hold it about 3 to 6 weeks before the actual event is when we hold our pre-screening. So at least 3 weeks is good to make sure that they have time to prepare and gather whatever documents they'll need to participate in the event. Then about a month before, we recruit volunteers. Then we train all of those volunteers a few days before. If we're using an online or virtual format, we'll test our technology, of course, a couple days before the event as well. And then you'll have your group processing event. But then it doesn't really end with that day. You just have to remember a few days after that, it's good to evaluate how everything went, put together your own best practices. And of course, don't forget to thank your volunteers and your partners. It's critical because you're always building for that next event. And people generally love these. They have a really great time. And you want to make sure that you're kind of building your core of participants, not just with the clients in the community, but also with your volunteers.
Yeah, and if I may even pull the microscope back a little bit, when I think about creating a new pro bono service opportunity, I think I have a little bit of the luxury that I get to first focus on it being a good volunteer opportunity because I don't have an active caseload at my organization. So one of the things that I like to think about whether or not it might be a good fit is would it take someone in-house under 4 or 5 hours to accomplish the same thing? And if so, can then be accomplished and transferred to a clinic setting, primarily when I think about limited scope opportunities, where a volunteer can come in, do the thing, do the great work, feel good, have done something concrete, and then leave. And if we can't do that thing in-house in under 4 or 5 hours, it's not a good fit for a clinic. And we might be thinking about crafting another sort of short-term opportunity, as Sarah mentioned, where you have the volunteer, where you really speak with them, managing expectations about what you're expecting them to do within the timeline that they have. But assuming that it can be accomplished in-house in under 4 or 5 hours, that does kind of let us know that a clinic is possible, although the volunteers will likely take longer than the 4 or 5 hours. Particularly many volunteers who I think are attracted to limited scope opportunities can be some of the non-immigration attorneys, because they think, oh, a full case, that's scary, but I can commit to a day. Will you help me? And I really like to try and think about the moving parts. I think Caroline brought up a really, really great point about how the day involves the pre-work, right? Making sure you have the right clients in the right opportunity and the volunteers trained for that right opportunity, and knowing the post work that you might have to do, whatever that is. But I also think really granularly about, like, what does that timeline look like? Even before I try and think about, okay, let's start calling the clients and doing outreach, what does that timeline look like? Specifically, how will volunteers accomplish what it is that I'm expecting them to do? And then that kind of helps me create some of those training materials and the resources and tools that we might provide to the volunteers so they can accomplish that goal. Both helping the organization achieve something that they want to achieve, to meet an unmet legal need, while also being a really positive experience for the volunteer, so that you'll hope they'll come back.
Great, thanks. Those are all really amazing tips from all three of you. One of the things, Kate, that you just mentioned was the training and materials that you develop. Would you talk a little bit about what support you provide to attorneys so that they can confidently engage in these projects?
Yeah, so most of the training for these limited scope opportunities admittedly is going to happen on the day of, right? In the same way the cases, because you can only cram so much into an online webinar. But before the clinic, we do expect volunteers to take an online training, either live or recording of a prior one. And then leading up to the clinic a couple of days before, we do make a training available to the volunteers who've actually signed up for the particular opportunity, that goes over some of the logistics and provides some of the contexts of the service that they're providing. A little bit about, okay, this is the pre-work we've done as an organization. Here's what's going to happen to the client after they leave the day. Also, sometimes you do that training the morning of. I have found that sometimes trying to cram that training in the morning of can be a really, really long day for volunteers. And it's nice to kind of give them that pre-recording, although of course being available and allotting time for questions on the day of. But every volunteer who participates at one of my project's in-person clinics, particularly our consult clinics, will receive a folder like this. And it has all of the things that they're going to need for their volunteering. On one side, I have kind of volunteer resources, administrative forms that I kind of need them to sign so they can volunteer. And on the other side, the documents that they would actually use with the client. The highlights of what is included in the folder is for the volunteers. On one side, they have to sign a confidentiality agreement, particularly those non-attorney volunteers who are not already bound by the duty of confidentiality rules that us attorneys all abide by. I have the attorneys sign an agreement saying that they promise to not charge the client that they are meeting with that day, and they promise not to kind of strong arm them or solicit them into trying to turn it into paid work. We also have a cheat sheet that we make available to the volunteers, outlining the important parts of the law that they may be talking about, just as kind of a resource to the volunteers about the laws that they're going to be using, so that maybe if they're waiting for the mentor to be available, or maybe they don't need to ask the mentor their question if it's just kind of quickly there on their cheat sheet. There's also a glossary for the non-attorney volunteers or the attorney volunteers who do actually speak the language of the clients, highlighting important language that might come up in the consult in the legal context that they might not be used to talking about. Also, all of our clinics have something we call an attorney roadmap, which you can think about it as a checklist of all of the things that need to happen in that service in order to meet a baseline of legal services. We, as experienced attorneys working with the immigrant population regularly, may take for granted that it might be a good idea to explain what confidentiality means, and kind of how our legal system kind of works, with where you can tell your lawyer something and the lawyer's not going to tell other people, including their family members or potentially their sponsor that brought them to that clinic that day. And that just established because kind of the baseline things. It also includes things like making sure to go over the scope of what the volunteer is doing with them today. Certainly, we all have clients sign what the scope of legal services that they are receiving, but we also have the volunteers review that scope, what the limited service is. It in the checklist even flags certain points where mentors can and should be consulted. So in my immigration consult clinic, before any volunteer actually opens their mouth to give legal advice, they are required to come to me or one of the other staff attorneys to go over with information what they've learned and talk about what advice they think should be given and what the person needs to do next before they actually give that advice. We also at our clinics make sure to have an advice sheet ready for the clients so that they are also leaving with a tool that is crafted and stating the exact correct thing that it should be. It might be different in the context if you're actually going to be filling out a form instead of doing a consult, like if there's anything that needs to be filed, instructions that they need to be aware of. Also including a kind of a CYA note that the limited scope service is now over, just so that everyone is kind of clear. Or maybe it's not over, depending upon the relationship that you might have with that person moving forward. And then in the remote context, we don't use this folder, but we've attempted to recreate kind of an online folder, if you will, through sharing different links in an email so that everything's kind of really all in one place. And our interview sheet, we use the SharePoint Excel spreadsheet system so that we could still have access to reviewing the volunteers' notes during our mentorship sessions.
Great, thanks, Kate. That's a lot of great information about training, just a really thorough and impressive training process that you have set up. As far as when you are, what are some advice that all of you could give as far as finding attorneys and recruiting attorneys to match them to these different projects? And I'm just leaving this one kind of open out there, whoever would like to jump in first and maybe give some advice on getting attorneys signed up.
I can jump in. So when you're thinking about recruiting attorneys, what we do is we always try to frame the opportunity as a chance to help the community, but also to connect with their colleagues. So especially right now that we're in the pandemic, a lot of people are not having those, regular happy hours or opportunities to connect with other immigration attorneys or attorneys in general. And so, we're framing this as, this is a time to serve the community and also get together. For newer attorneys, it's also an opportunity to learn from experienced practitioners. So, make sure that you're highlighting that in some way as you're recruiting for volunteers. Also, it's a really fun event, whether it's virtual or in person. This is a time where volunteers, again, are connecting with clients, they're connecting with each other, and you're going to try to make it a good experience as well so that they do plan to come back to your events in the future. So what we also try to do when we're recruiting volunteers, though, is that we try to be really intentional about how many volunteers we need in each particular volunteer category for events. And so for group processing, typically we will have individual kind of volunteer roles. So we'll have a role to help with kind of check-in and registration. We'll have a role for forms preparation. We'll have an attorney review role, and then also a quality assurance and then next steps as well. So when we're recruiting for attorneys, once we have some people signed up, we use basically a Google sign up form that asks a lot of questions where we can kind of group people with their language capabilities and their skill level, how much experience they have with various immigration forms that we're going to be completing during the group processing event. And for experienced practitioners, we will ask them to help with pre-screening, with final attorney review, also with quality assurance. With some of those newer attorneys or people who don't practice immigration law, oftentimes we will place them in kind of the forms prep, sometimes attorney review, depending on whether or not they've done the event many times or whether we have a mentor available to kind of sit with them on cases. Because again, sometimes people really are seeing this as a training opportunity and an opportunity for them to kind of learn whichever kind of forms or immigration remedies you're doing with these group processing events. So making it beneficial for those individuals is helpful. Then we have typically in the forms preparation station, we have law students, paralegals, legal assistants, those types of individuals. And then we oftentimes can still engage college students or other community members as people who are helping with registration, with kind of packaging and pre-addressing envelopes and things, with signing stations, with translation, interpretation. And then if you're doing a virtual event, it's always helpful to try to find some of those tech savvy individuals who can help out with Zoom or whichever kind of virtual platforms you're using. It's really invaluable. And oftentimes we are not the tech experts, so always good to have someone else who's available to help with that. And when we're recruiting, we go straight to our AILA chapter first. So that's generally a great place for us to find volunteers. But we also look within local bar associations, corporate pro bono programs, some of the larger firms in the area, law schools, paralegal programs, colleges and universities, and partner organizations, especially for support with individuals who can interpret or translate. So again, as long as you're training them and placing them well, you're going to have a successful event. And of course, I always say, don't forget to thank everyone.
Great. Thanks, Caroline. Once you have these attorneys and you've been able to get them involved in one of these brief service type projects, or maybe more than once, are you able to transition some of these attorneys into full representation with your clients? And what are some tips that you could offer for others who are trying to do that, if you have experience with that? And this is open to anyone who might want to jump in with any advice.
We've never done that before with the limited rep and then gone into full direct rep. But what we have seen is that attorneys who have volunteered with us for smaller scope events like TPS clinics, naturalization clinics, or writing of the BIA appeals, or doing a pro se asylum, afterwards, they want to get more involved. I wish that would happen all the time, but it's great when it does happen. So while we've not been able to use the same case and transition them into direct rep, just because we are strict about the scope when the client comes in or when the respondent comes in, we always hope that the experience is good enough that they'll come back and then agree to direct rep, which is obviously a much larger time commitment.
Yeah, I think that I kind of consider my clinics a training ground for full rep, to get people motivated for full scope direct rep, because you can kind of recruit them, catch them in with the hook of it's just one day, and then hopefully they have such a good experience, they want to come back time and time again, and they grow confident. So I think, doing a really good job at some of like the small stuff that may seem super unimportant to someone who does the work day in and day out, but may make a volunteer really embarrassed that like they don't know something, or just kind of making them feel really comfortable to ask those questions and feel supported, so that they know that if they moved on to a larger scope opportunity, they would feel supported. Also, in other consult clinics, we don't have the ability to actually place the case with them full rep, although we definitely work with the people who we have consulted with to try and get them representation. So we just ask, it's a part of our interview form. Right before the mentoring session, there's a question asking the volunteer, would you be interested in taking this case for a full scope direct rep? And volunteers have checked yes sometimes, right? Same at some of the clinics that we had worked with some partner organizations to use volunteers to do intake, right? The organizations were using volunteer time to do intake, which takes a lot of staff time to kind of figure out all of the facts and do you offer representation or not based upon the information that is learned in that interview. We would ask at the end of those clinics, okay, these cases are going to be placed on a waiting list now for pro bono representation. Do any of you want to continue with the case? Similar in some of the asylum pro se work that has been done, and a few of the volunteers raised their hands and said, yeah, I want to see this case through now that what I want to know what's going to happen to this person, and I actually have some power and can learn some of the skills to change what is going to happen to this person who I've now really kind of gained a rapport with. And I can't emphasize enough what both Caroline and Sarah have already said about making sure that volunteers feel appreciated. Thank them right after the clinic, each and every time. Thank them when they arrive. Thank them when they express an interest in your volunteering. Thank them when they have a question and say, that's a good question, and this is how we learn. Also a fun kind of tech tip about thanking. Many people are familiar with doing a mail merge in a Word document for a printed mailing. You can also do a mail merge using Outlook mailings. So if you have a thank you letter that you want to send out to your volunteers or to a subset of your volunteers to really express your appreciation for them, you can do that in Outlook, and it'll say, hi, the first name that you have entered into the spreadsheet for them. And you just can click send once after you maybe you've even edited specific letters that will go to specific people, and it will send through Word as if it was from your Outlook. So that's like just a really easy tool that we've discovered during the pandemic as a way to make thanking even easier.
Great, thank you. So we've talked quite a bit about, meeting, kind of working with attorneys and getting the attorneys involved. Let's talk a little bit about the client services and how do you craft these projects to meet client needs and get the clients the support they need when they aren't going to have an attorney for the entire case? What are some of your tips for that, and how to really best craft your projects to meet your client needs in the community?
Well, what we do at SOAR is, we really make sure that we're identifying a particular need that is relevant to the community. It's something that's really seriously needed, where we know with data that there are a large number of individuals who need this particular type of support. And then we pre-screen. So we do want to make sure that whoever's participating in a group processing event, again, at SOAR, we choose very kind of straightforward cases, cases with no red flags, just so that there won't be that that anxiety or nervousness before the interview about, oh, I had this particular arrest, how am I going to need to, what should I say? And, all of those types of things, that it's, these kind of straightforward cases that will be able to support people with the filing process. So typically we do these pre-screenings at least 3 weeks before the event, so that we can really prepare people and make sure they have a full list of every document that they'll need to file and that they'll need to bring to the event if it's an in-person event, or drop by our office if we're having a signing station after the virtual event. So, I think it's really important just to kind of ask yourself those questions as you're crafting the project around the complexity and the referral system, if you're going to be taking cases without red flags. So that's how we do that. We also, as Kate had mentioned earlier, we make sure that that the participants in these events understand that it is a limited scope representation, and that they are, when they're signing, they understand that these limited scope agreements are in their language, so that they fully understand this is someone helping you today, but they're not going to be helping you throughout the course of your case. But we do hold kind of regular consultation or follow-up events for people who've participated in workshops, so that they can come ask one of our staff attorneys at our nonprofit any questions that may come up along the way, or if there's some hiccup in the process, that they don't feel totally left alone, but that the volunteers really are having that kind of one-day engagement.
As far as client needs, this is a question that came up in the Q&A that I think probably will fit in pretty well right here. But what about volunteer attorneys who don't speak the same language as the client? How do you meet the client needs whenever you have volunteer attorneys who don't speak the same language as the client?
I would say that nearly all of our volunteer attorneys don't speak the language of the client, which is predominantly Spanish. And so in addition to our recruitment efforts for volunteer attorneys and trainings for attorneys, we also have a parallel recruitment effort to recruit and train volunteer interpreters. Law students can be a good source of volunteer interpreters, but I found for straight up interpreting, those university students are the ones that you really want to engage, because I think that university students are so underused in the legal services setting, but there's so many of them are interested in helping immigrants with their legal cases, or maybe they're pre-law students, right? And they're just trying to get kind of a legal-like-esque thing on their resume as they apply to law school. So we've had a lot of success reaching out to the local universities. And in fact, we use a student from Johns Hopkins every semester as an intern, and they not only interpret, but also help us internally with like responding to our requests for that, we get a lot of calls from service seekers who want our help, and just to kind of meet the need and be responsive to the number of people who've called, we actually use university students also in that way, not just kind of for straight up interpretation. But yeah, we recruit them, we train them, we make them sign confidentiality agreements, we vet their fluency by having a conversation with them in Spanish, interview them about, their understanding of what confidentiality means. Have they ever had a time where they had to keep information a secret? Oh, well, I did throw a surprise party once. Okay, like that they understand the idea that you can't get the word across. And we've had such, I've loved our university students, and so many of them have sometimes actually pointed out slight changes to the way that we've been doing things that I don't even know that a law student would have been thinking about in the same way a university student would be. So.
Okay. How do you, there's a question that came in that probably will fit in well here as well. How do you handle clinic registrations and last minute cancellations? Anyone that wants to jump in?
I think if with any event, you just have to remain flexible. Our first virtual event that we held, we had about 10 people knocking outside of our door, and we're having to say, oh no, it's actually on Zoom, and kind of figure out how we reroute people. There are typically going to be no-shows. It's very rare to have an event where you have 100% attendance, whether it's in person or virtual. Something always comes up. And so being flexible and having ideas of, how to be a little bit nimble, and having staff or more experienced attorneys who would be available to do pre-screenings if you have people who didn't register that show up, because of course that happens too. Especially in the virtual format, you'll have someone on a Zoom and their spouse pops on and says, hey, can I receive this service right now too? So if you have some of those more experienced attorneys or staff available to those pre-screenings, that's helpful. If you have no shows, again, back to the volunteer volunteer experience, because you want these people to come back, you may want to think ahead of time around pairing people and talking with different volunteers who might be a good fit to be paired. You know, and just making sure that people are comfortable with that. But again, as you're thinking about your volunteer pool, you don't want to have too many volunteers so that so that if you end up in a situation where you have multiple no-shows, you have people with nothing to do. That's something you want to try to avoid. But really just being nimble and kind of expecting that you will have both no-shows and unregistered individuals coming for the day just makes it a little bit easier once it happens, and kind of having that game plan of how to rearrange people.
What advice do you have, and how do you get the word out about the clinics to your client population? I know we talked a bit about getting the word out to the lawyers to recruit them, but how do you get the information out to the clients so that they're aware of this clinic that's going on and of these services?
We have a lot of connections with in the community with the churches. And so through those relationships, we're able to put out flyers and information. And it's a really great relationship because people who go there, they trust what the people in the church are telling them. And so, you know, they don't feel like they're walking into some sort of ICE trap. We also have a good relationship with two of the Spanish language television networks down here. And so sometimes they'll feature one of our attorneys for 5 to 10 minutes, or, you know, we'll talk to their media department, and then they'll have it on the Spanish language news, you know, saying there's going to be this clinic on this day. This is what you need to bring. But especially predominantly our clients are Spanish speaking or Haitian Creole. And so between those two, we found that we've been able to reach a really large segment of the immigrant population down here.
I'd also add to that schools and healthcare providers and community organizations. And also actually for unaccompanied children, the Office of Refugee Resettlement Shelters. Depending upon where you are in the country, you may have different opinions about whether or not those shelters fulfill their role as a shelter as opposed to detention. So you may have varied success at whether or not they'll help you get the word out, but definitely like the people working on the post-release services team are really eager to try and connect the children that they're working with some sort of organization in the local community that can maybe offer some additional assistance beyond the assistance that they're able to provide. And schools doing outreach presentations for schools during the pandemic, I think has been really, really useful. We, as an organization of doing an immigration court help desk, didn't really have to do outreach before the pandemic began. But schools, once we started giving school presentations, those service seeker requests skyrocketed, right? And now we're in this position where we need help responding to those calls. And they're also really helpful because it's not just the same sort of presentation, know your rights presentation currently, because things at court are changing. People are wondering, like, can I actually file applications? Is the court open? Is the court closed? What does it actually mean if it's open or closed? Like, what is the Biden administration doing with all of these notices that they gave us at the border? Like, should I check in with ICE at this final location 90 days from the time that I arrived there? You know, those kinds of questions are definitely very answerable in a group setting, and it's just another way to gain trust and show, like, yeah, we speak your language, like we got this, like you can call us.
Just a few more that I would throw in there as well that have been really successful kind of outreach sources for us are various unions. Oftentimes we're able to generate a lot of client interest working with the unions, with libraries. Those kind of circulation desks, they end up doing a lot of outreach and connecting a lot of people either with citizenship classes or legal services or other things. And, you know, when in doubt, a lot of people go to the library. And then in addition to that, if you have any consulates or embassies in your area, they do a fantastic job of doing outreach and, you know, allowing flyers and other things like that to drive people to your events.
Thank you. So let's see, I'm just looking, there have been a couple of questions that came through that I think I'm going to go ahead and move to, and then we'll kind of move on to our last topic. But one question came in: have any of you had success with creating clinic opportunities for, sorry, my question is cut off on the screen, any opportunities for special immigrant juvenile status clinics, or anything with asylum aside from simple preparation of pro se I-589s? So any experience either with the SIJS or anything aside from simple preparation for asylum?
I can jump in there because we did a special immigrant juvenile status clinic in conjunction with another organization. It was a clinic that was designed to have volunteer attorney support of the cases which the organization was handling in-house. So the clients themselves or the potential SAJ seekers themselves were not there. However, the organization was understaffed, and so they just needed kind of extra help reviewing the files that the organization and the information that had already been collected on the individual, and then kind of organizing it out into a framework of a first draft custody order plus predicate order motion to get the special findings, so that when they then hired that attorney who was going to be responsible for those, I think it ended up being like 6 or 7 cases, it was already like a tabbed, okay, you've got to focus on these things to get these things filed. They may have been some of the more emergent files that really, like, there was no one on staff that could be able to handle those things. And then, you know, we designed a roadmap and sample pleadings with blanks and things like that. The organization didn't end up wanting to do that clinic again. However, I do believe that some of the volunteers that we trained that day did go on to do SIJ cases with them, or similar sort of, I'm going to review your file and like help you get organized with the legal eye here work, which I think they did ultimately find helpful.
Also, I know we've talked a few times about, there have been, I think, a lot of questions about like non-attorney volunteers, and that seems to be an area that's of a lot of interest. Have any of you had any experience recruiting mental health professionals to help with evaluations, which often help support the case made by attorneys? And I'm assuming this might be asking a little bit more about like not so much the limited scope projects, but maybe more for like the asylum.
We have a relationship with the University of Miami Human Rights Clinic, and they're wonderful, and they provide us with free psychological evaluations for not only our clients, but if a pro bono attorney takes a case through us for direct rep, and this is full scope, then they will do the evaluation. And it's not just them, there's other universities in the area that do it. So I'm not really sure how that relationship was established because that predates my time at Catholic Legal Services. But I would say, again, look to your local universities, law schools, if they have the human rights clinics, or, you know, if you have a med school around, because it's a great opportunity for the med students to observe. And it's a fantastic piece of evidence that you'll have that you can submit on behalf of the client.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Oh, go ahead, Caroline.
Well, not so much on the mental health piece, but for our refugee adjustment days, we actually have had a station with civil surgeons who are doing the supplement to the I-693 medical. And we found that that is a really interesting and very fulfilling partnership for our partners and civil surgeons who are doing that work. So yeah, just get creative. You know, whatever kind of new ideas you think of. A lot of people are really interested, you know, they're watching the news, they're hearing what's happening. They have friends or family members or community members who are experiencing an unjust immigration system. And so don't be afraid to engage and kind of just put your questions out there. I think we've found people to be very receptive.
The last topic we had to talk about was technology usage. Oh, sorry, you know what, a quick question just came in. Caroline, how did you recruit civil surgeons?
So that was one of our partners had a relationship with one of the medical providers here in Portland. And so she kind of worked through her relationships to put out a call for volunteers who were licensed civil surgeons to go ahead and sign up for that. So feel free to contact me off of the webinar, and I can give you a little more information on the details on that, because it was a great partnership and so helpful for the refugees who are participating in the event.
So I know there have been all of these changes over the last 2 years because of the pandemic, where a lot of these projects have had to transition. What tips do you have on using technology to make these projects accessible whenever a lot of in-person services are not available, or potentially transitioning some of these to technology-based in the future?
I can talk a bit about our virtual workshops that we've been doing for citizenship specifically. I think the first tip that I have is, figure out which technology, which platforms you'd like to use. For Citizenship Day, we always use Zoom, we use Slack, and we use Citizenship Works. And so with Zoom, what we end up doing is we have a license where we have 50 breakout rooms, which sounds like a lot, but once you're actually kind of pre-setting up your structure for the event and you're labeling your number of forms stations, we label the form stations with the language proficiency as well, so that it's easy for the host to move people. We pre-label the attorney rooms with language as well. We have kind of the whole kind of format set up ahead of time. And then we make sure that we have hosts who are very tech savvy, who are going to be working as the behind the scenes hosts on the day of the event. For us, those are our partners. So other immigration or other nonprofits that work with the immigrant community who have had to transition from not doing in-person outreach, but doing kind of webinars and things like that. You'll find a lot of organizations in the community have a lot of experience with tech and with Zoom. And so that's kind of how we've worked out that piece of it. We use Slack during our virtual events because we want to make sure that people aren't chatting through Zoom to preserve confidentiality. What we really don't want is a volunteer thinking that they're sending a message to one person when in fact they're sending it to the whole group. And so with Slack, we actually have different kind of channels set up. We have client advancement channels that the hosts are connected to, where someone in forms can put in when it's time for a client, when they're completely finished with the form, they can make a note in their Slack for client advancement to the host that the client's ready to move on. And then we also have Ask the Expert channels for both forms and the attorney review, where we have a staff member who's experienced, answering those questions as they're coming in. And generally we'll have 2 people answering those questions on those channels, just in case it gets busy or there are a lot of questions at the same time. And then I would say if you're doing a citizenship day, Citizenship Works is fantastic. They can set up a portal for your nonprofit so that you can kind of, all of those individuals who have been pre-screened, you can kind of pre-set up accounts for them if you like, and then you can basically have everything through that portal, so you're not having to email back and forth, N400 forms or other kind of confidential information. You can just have everything in that portal. You can give people different permissions, so some people are reviewing only certain forms, some people can access the forms, some people can't. And the best part about it too is that the staff from Citizenship Works have come to every one of our volunteer trainings and actually trained all of our volunteers for us, and they're available for tech support day of the event too. So I would definitely recommend those things.
I have one very low tech recommendation that we've learned through trial and error. We do a lot of intakes and pro-says through Zoom now. And so something that we have the children do is to do a 360 so that they're facing us with their camera, so that we know no one else is in the room, because we have had problems with sponsors being in the room. So that's just a good tip. They can take their laptop or they can take their phone. Also, if your client or the person that you're helping has a problem with the technology, I can't recommend highly enough YouTube because they have great videos in many different languages on how to install Zoom or other platforms on your phone, which tend to be how most of our clients communicate with us.
Yeah, so we also use Zoom, but we use the Zoom only to communicate with our volunteers because we have our volunteers communicate with the service seekers using WhatsApp. Early on, before we knew that all school children were gonna suddenly become experts on Zoom because that's how they access most of their life, we had just asked the people that we had already registered for consults that were supposed to have been in person, what technology do you feel comfortable using? And hands down, they all indicated familiarity with WhatsApp already being on their phone. In order to use volunteers in this way, we did have to purchase some Google Voice numbers through a G Suite for a relatively low cost per month, so that we kind of give the volunteers the activation code to set up WhatsApp using that phone number. We also can create the group in which the volunteer will use to call the person that they're going to be advising, and then remove ourselves from the group so that they can communicate with each other without actually ever having shared any real contact information or store any contact information in their phone or device external to something under PBRC's control. And we have found that that has been really helpful.
Thanks. So we're almost out of time. There is one additional question in the Q&A that circles back a little bit to the recruiting of pro bono attorneys. What recruitment methods and demographics have you found best suited to limited scope representation, coupled with repeat engagement of volunteer attorneys over time? So any tips on that?
If you can partner with one of the big firms, I find that's awesome because they normally, or in our experience down here, they have a dedicated pro bono person, and that person is usually national. And so they're able to provide resources to the volunteer. And I found that a lot of attorneys who work for big firms, they want to help, but they're also, billing an insane amount of hours. And so these limited type opportunities are really good for them because they don't have time to do the direct rep. And maybe they don't have the language skills, but they're able to reconnect with the community. And I think, that kind of harkens back for all of us, some of the reasons why we went to law school, but we also need to pay the bills. So if you can get in touch with the national directors to some of the big firms, we've had great success with that. And they've been really awesome to work with, especially for the appellate work.
But also, don't forget the small guys who, going back to Caroline's point, might be in particular need of connection, particularly during the pandemic, because small and solo practitioners, unlike big firm practitioners, don't have a ready network of mentors and contacts and people that they can go to ask questions of if they're interested in an area of law. So I would have to say that a lot of my volunteers for our clinics actually do tend to be small firm or solo practitioners. And I just love them because, first of all, they're fabulous because they're my volunteers, but also like they've got flexible schedules. Like if things are canceled, they're not super stressed out because their partner said that they could only do it at this time and not this other time, not to scare you away from big firm volunteers, right? But they're small firm folks can be really great too. And one of the barriers or perceived barriers they may be for engaging them is malpractice insurance. So we just provide that to the volunteers who are working with our program. So if any of you guys are working with programs and considering the use of volunteers, I'd really consider making malpractice insurance a part of your offerings, along with the mentorship, training, interpreters, case pleading, sample pleading, checklists, what have you. And then I think my final point on recruitment is only attorneys can do pro bono legal services. Anyone can do a lot of other really great feel-good opportunities, but only attorneys have the power to learn the skills to provide legal services. So that's something I really emphasize, I think, when I go out into these different kind of bar association meetings or electronic communications. And I point to some of the statistics maybe we all know or maybe we all don't know about track immigration, right? That 90% of unaccompanied children without representation get ordered to return to their home country, either voluntarily or not. And I think that's really important stats. And then you also have to put some client stories behind that, right? Here's the stats, but then here's someone who are actually looking for an attorney to help right now. If anything about this person you've heard says, I want to figure out how to prevent that, like, let's talk, we'll make it work.
Thanks. Those are some really great points. And we are out of time today. So I just want to thank Caroline, Sarah, and Kate for your willingness to speak to this group today and on this panel. You all really just had some wonderful advice, and we're really lucky to hear from such experienced practitioners as yourselves. And thank you everyone for joining us. This webinar was recorded. We will send out the link, and it'll also be posted on the Commission on Immigration's YouTube page. And feel free, if you have questions in the interim, to email myself or Stephanie or Emily with the Commission on Immigration. And with that, thanks so much. And we will go ahead and end for the day. Take care, everyone, and stay safe out there. Thanks again for joining us.